Yellow Vest protesters have gathered in Paris and other cities for a fifth consecutive Saturday of demonstrations. About 69,000 police have been mobilized across France to prevent a repeat of the violence of previous weeks. The movement, initially against a rise in fuel taxes, now addresses other issues, including education reforms. Protesters defied a government call to suspend the action following Tuesday's attack on Strasbourg's Christmas market, where a gunman killed 4 people. 7 people have died in the Gilets Jaunes Yellow Vest protests so far, the latest in an accident resulting from a blockade by protesters on Friday. Overall, some 33,500 have turned out across the country, police say. This includes Bordeaux, Marseille, Lyon, Nantes, Toulouse and others. Fewer than 3,000 people have turned out in Paris so far this Saturday, the authorities say. Last week, there were about 8,000. Police have stopped and questioned 114 people in the capital, a fifth of the number detained a week ago. Some shops and department stores have closed for the day. Scuffles broke out in the center of Paris on Saturday, and the police fired tear gas to disperse a crowd trying to make their way through police lines. Last time we were here for taxes, said
28-YEAR-OLD
called Jeremy, told the AFP news agency. This is for the institutions. We want more direct democracy, he said, adding that people needed to shout to make themselves heard. Some museums are closed, but both the Louvre and the Eiffel Tower remain open. In Calais, a group of Yellow Vests blocked the access road to the port. The impact of the demonstrations has been keenly felt in France. The government has been forced to bow to pressure and adjust its economic course. President Emmanuel Macron responded to the nationwide street protests by scrapping an unpopular fuel tax rise and promising an extra $140 a month on minimum wage earners and tax cuts for pensioners. However, it is far from clear that he has done enough to diffuse public anger. The BBC's Hugh Schofield in Paris says some in the movement are calling for a pause following President Macron's concessions, but there are still Yellow Vests around the country who feel now is not the time to ease the pressure. On Friday, a driver died following a collision with a truck in Orleans, a Walloon municipality on the border with Belgium. The truck had been held up by a group of Yellow Vest protesters. 6 other people have died in connection with the protests. 3 bells looted by us troops more than a century ago have been returned to their church in the Philippines. President Rodrigo Duterte praised his countrymen and the us at a ceremony in Balangita, where the treasures were taken 117 years ago. The bronze bells were seized during the Philippine-American War as part of reprisals following a massacre. In August, the Arts Embassy announced the return of the so-called Balangita bells. After decades of pressure, nobody can claim a singular credit for the generous act of the Americans, Mr. Duterte told a jubilant crowd on Saturday. The credit goes to the American people and to the Filipino people, period. The president had called for their return in a 2017 speech, in which he also suggested building closer ties with China. The bells are viewed as a symbol of Philippine independence against their former colonial masters, following the Balangita massacre of 1901, when Filipino militants ambushed and killed 48 troops. Thus General Jacob H. Smith ordered the area be turned into a howling wilderness. Thus troops seized 3 bronze bells as war trophies during the bloody reprisals. Thousands of Filipinos are thought to have been killed, despite calls for their return for decades. Thus veterans and politicians said the bills were tributes to the killed US troops and refused to consider their repatriation. One of the bills was with the US 9th Infantry Regiment in Korea and the other two were at a former 11th Infantry Regiment base in Wyoming. But after continued Filipino pressure and waning opposition in the US, the bills were flown to Manila earlier this week for Saturday, its ceremony in Balangita. We are the happiest people on earth now.
81YEAR-OLD
Nancy Oteran told AFP news agency. The whole town is walking in the clouds because the bills are finally with us. However, for some the return struck a more somber note. Gaston Chadapa told AFP the bills gave her mixed emotions given the history surrounding them. It was painful and you cannot take it away from us, she said. We can never forget that. As Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke is leaving his post at the end of the year, President Donald Trump says, in the latest high-profile departure from his administration. In a tweet, President Trump thanked Mr. Zinke for his service, saying he had achieved much during his tenure. He said he would appoint a new Interior Secretary next week. Mr. Zinke, an ex-Navy SEAL and a former Montana congressman, has been embroiled in allegations of ethics violations. They include a land deal in Montana involving Mr. Zinke and the chairman of Oilfield Services Halliburton. Politico reported. Secretary of the Interior Adrian Zinke will be leaving the administration at the end of the year after having served for a period of almost 2 years. Ryan has accomplished much during his tenure, and I want to thank him for his service to our nation. End of Twitter post by @real Donald Trump. He has faced scrutiny over expensive trips in Spark police helicopters and on private jets. Costly alterations at his department also came in for criticism, including reports that 3 sets of double doors in his office were being upgraded at a cost of nearly
$139,110,110,000.
He later said he had negotiated the price down to
$75,000,000.
It was not clear if Mr. Zinke had resigned or was fired. The Interior Department oversees federal land, including national parks such as Yosemite and Yellowstone. His appointment angered environmental advocacy groups, who accused Mr. Zinke of being in hoc to corporate polluters. News of Mr. Zinke's departure comes just a week after the announcement that Mr. Trump's chief of staff, John Kelly, is to leave the White House. On Friday, Mr. Trump named his successor as Mick Mulvaney, who is currently director of the Office of Management and Budget. Mr Rajapaksa has resigned as Sri Lanka's prime minister 7 weeks after he was appointed, in a surprise move that sparked a political crisis. Mr. Rajapaksa, Sri Lanka's former president, signed his resignation letter in a ceremony at his house. His son, Namal, told the BBC his father had quit to ensure national stability. The resignation could bring to an end a nearly 2-month-long power struggle that has dented confidence in Sri Lanka's stability. In October, President Mr Sirisena sacked then Prime Minister Mr Wickremesinghe, replacing him with Mr Rajapaksa. Mr Wickremesinghe is expected to return to office on Sunday. His party's spokesman Harry Fernando told the BBC. The president has agreed to swear in Mr Wickremesinghe as Prime Minister tomorrow at 10 a.m. He said this would end the political deadlock, remarking that the country and its economy had suffered huge damage since the crisis began 50 days ago. On Thursday, the Supreme Court said Mr Sirisena had acted illegally in November by dissolving Parliament and calling snap goals, with nearly 2 years to go until elections were Throughout the crisis, Mr Wickremesinghe has always maintained he is the rightful PM. The crisis, which has provoked rows in Parliament and sparked large protests, has been closely watched by regional powers in India, as well as the US, China, and the European Union. Mr Rajapaksa, who dominated Sri Lankan politics for a decade, until 2015, has an uneasy relationship with the West over the bloody end to the country's civil war in 2009, when thousands of civilians were killed. Both government forces and the Tamil Tiger separatist rebels are accused of grave human rights abuses and crimes. On Wednesday, Parliament passed a vote of confidence in Ranil Wickremesinghe as Prime Minister. His party and its allies have a simple majority in Parliament and have argued from the beginning that President Sirisena's actions were unconstitutional